This House is now in Standing Finance Committee. Honourable Member for St. George South.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the Chamber, for giving me the opportunity to join this estimates debate. Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Nutritional Security.
Honourable.
First, let me congratulate my friend and colleague, Minister Weir, and his team. You have indeed satisfied the audience's requests for knowledge, and I term this Ministry of Agriculture, Food Security 101 course. And while we sat here and I sat and I was asking myself and asking my colleagues whether questions were answered on various issues that I raised with them, and they all said yes. And you even went as far as to discuss sheep and the naming of sheep, and whether sheep had Barbados passport or Guyanese passport, and where they were born, and where they should be kept. And you also define what a carcass was, because certain persons thought a carcass was bones, or carcasses, they said. And I want to thank you for the knowledge, indeed, and the explanations, dissecting and making it simple 101 agriculture. But my question to you, Minister and team, relates to the sugar industry. And again, I want to congratulate yourself and the team, specifically the chairman of BMC, who transitioned, or you are in the process of transitioning, ESCO, Barbados Energy and Sugar Company, as well as the Agricultural Business Company. And what is pioneering and revolutionary about this? It's the first in the history of government in this country where we will see 1,102 it is, persons being enfranchised and owning a share in this company. And that is indeed revolutionary. And that is worth speaking of. But my first question relates to the challenges within the sugar industry now, and when the sugar industry will start. It's a basic question, but it has its intricacies, with respect to the energy company and the other business company. I'm certain you will answer that, because I was asked by some members of the constituency of St. George South to ask you that question. I was also asked by some members of the constituency that I represent, St. George South, what is happening with the asset at Buckley Factory. And I know that the former administration have closed down Buckley Factory. And I know the fields in the St. George Valley are fully occupied with produce. But in terms of the asset, what is happening there with the asset? And my second question relates to what I'm seeing at, and I will use the Ellerton Primary School as an example to ask you the question with respect to agriculture within the schools, especially the primary schools, because I am proud of the school that my alma mater, Ellerton Primary. What I'm seeing there, black belly sheep, on a very small landscape. We have shade house, black belly sheep being raised there, and it is one of the projects in agriculture within the schools that is emulated and is revered within this country. And I'm proud as a former student of the Ellerton Primary School. And I asked the question, can't we replicate this across the other primary schools? Not just one, but create a program that 90% of the primary schools, if not all, will engage in a program such as this one. Because what it does, not only for the student, but for the country, it builds knowledge on agriculture. You heard the member for Christchurch West today going into the sphere of science in agriculture. It also builds the knowledge of food security and what we need to do. The technology now that is being employed in agriculture. And I heard the member for Christchurch West again speaking about 50 years down the road when we would not be so well endowed with arable land. So that's my second question, and I will wait until you answer those two to come back for my third.
Thank you, Honourable Member. And I wish to thank you for raising Buckley so we can have a conversation around Buckley. I also, on behalf of my team, wish to thank you for your commendation and wish to give the assurance to you and the rest of Barbados that this team has been working under trying times, given the fact that we've gone through 2 years of COVID, and we have still kept pace with what is taking place in the sector, and therefore we are pleased with the progress we are making. But I'm sure we can all agree that there's a lot more that we can achieve, and we are working towards that. Buckley Factory, as you may recall, in 2007, previous Barbados Labour Party administration made a decision to use Buckley Factory as the factory that we would have transitioned to from Portville. And then that was derailed when the government changed in 2008, where they went to Andrews Factory. I think the Andrews Factory project failed, and the government of the day in 2008 would have had a loan close to $100 million to set up that entire factory structure. I know that the Answer Merchant Bank paid out some $24 million to a company, a Barbadian company that was registered in St. Lucia. And we also then, that government went ahead and put up some molasses tanks in the Bridgetown port that were not really designed for the BAMC to own, but for the persons who set up the tanks to actually do a lease arrangement to the government of Barbados. And we have had to carry the cost of that in the debt restructuring. And that resulted in the government of Barbados paying out almost close to another $100 million with that arrangement. So that, Honourable Member, I want to thank you for raising this, because yesterday, when I presented on medicinal cannabis, the country was made to believe that $3.4 million annually for about 3 or 4 years was a huge sum. But when you calculate the amount of money that went into the sugar industry to do Andrews Factory that turned out to be a failure, I think one needs to understand the nexus between developing an industry and expending money in an industry that was already developed, but not taking the right decisions to transition. And therein lies the difference between what we are doing and what they did. Equally, the project that we are doing, which is an enfranchisement model, will not cost the government of Barbados $100 million. And so therefore, Honourable Member, I believe that there's a lot that the public needs to be told. This information cannot be hidden. We still had to pay back all of those outstanding loans. And we get a lot of talk in Barbados about the government borrowing money. But you can see where the money is going that we borrowed. Now, if anyone asks me what happened with the money that went into the sugar industry under that arrangement with the Answer Merchant Bank, I can't explain it. And therefore, $100 million later, molasses tanks in the Bridgetown port, etc. And it puts us in a position to ask, what is the wisdom behind questioning $3.4 million when we have outstanding nearly $200 million that is not explained under the previous administration? And therefore, I wish to assure you, Honourable Member, that When I became minister and I looked at the models that were presented, my first option was to look at how we can use Buckley. But as it turned out, the investment in Buckley would have been in excess of $100 million. We didn't have the financing. We didn't want to take this project where the previous administration took it. And we felt that we had to find the easiest way out for government. Remove the 30 million, close to 40 million subvention, enfranchise people, and look at Old Man River to see how he can perform. And that is where we started to invest in the repairs at Portville, rather than go back the route of incurring additional debt like what was incurred at Andrews, and work to build up Portville factory, whilst at the same time giving the government the elbow room to do other things rather than invest further money in the sugar industry. And that's what we did. There are a group of private sector farmers who had expressed an interest in doing a pilot arrangement at Buckley factory to test whether or not king grass was an option. And I didn't have a problem with that fundamentally, but we didn't get that off the ground either. And so, therefore, we are back at Portville. Now, somewhere down in the future, when the renewable energy projects are proven, and we need to go to expansion, that is where Buckley Factory can come back into the conversation. But as it stands right now, we cannot delay. We have to get the project going. We have to do the renewable energy, and Portville can facilitate all of this. So what I'll do, I'll ask Ambassador Dr. Clyde Maskell to go through what is happening at Portville, why we are not currently working with Buckley, and we can then decipher how we go forward in terms of the industry expansion and the use of a new factory if necessary. Ambassador.
Good afternoon. Was your substantive question about the starter crop? Okay, so thank you, sir. This matter is raised every year. But when the sugar industry should start to grind cane is dependent on the maturity of the cane. And there are scientific means by which you can do so to test the cane. So that I would like to introduce, if I could, introduce this document called Sugarcane Farming in Barbados, edited by Dr. Sandra Bellamy and Mr. Gerald Proverbs. And on page 205 of this document, it says here, the ideal cane stalks
Mr. Chair,
for...
Mr. Chair, just for completeness, I would suggest that the minister asks to make that a document of the House.
Yeah.
Minister.
This can be made.
I don't remember this can be made a document of the House.
Yeah. It says here, and I quote page 205, the ideal cane stalks for sugar production should have no less than 50% juice by weight, with the juice bricks exceeding 20%. The level of sugar produced depends on two factors: the juice yield from cane and the recovery of juice at the factory. The notion of bricks is that it is a measure of total dissolved solids, which includes something called invert sugars. In essence, you're measuring for the sucrose, the moisture, and fiber content in the cane. It is therefore important to note here that when you scientifically determine when the factory should grind cane, it should be based on the quality of the cane that comes to the factory. And in light of that, BMC, or now ABC, conducted tests for bricks. In January, the measure or percentage was between 14 to 16%. Remember, it should exceed 20. In February, at the end of February, it went to 17%, and then it is approaching 19%. So that we expect that ideally by next week, the bricks should be of the order of 20 or more %, which is what it should be to determine the start of crop. So that we have used this scientific method in order to make good decisions about the industry, the use of science and data. Now, last year, to prove this point, the increase in production of cane was 17% over 2022. But the increase in production of sugar was as much as 37%. Therefore, something caused that to happen. And what caused it to happen predominantly was the better quality cane, occasioned by the fact that the industry has been using more and more hot water treated cane over time. And you may not believe this, but one gentleman, a sugar boiler, he hates to be called a palm boiler, named Cedric Eastman from St. Patrick's, returned to the factory and was able to increase the way in which we recover sugar, because it is a method of doing so. You're almost cooking sugar in a pan, but it calls for a very scientific approach. And he was able to lift the production of sugar last year, not single-handedly, but his contribution was exceedingly pronounced for the last crop. So that we're going to be in a position for sure by mid-next week, when we see the bricks going to 20 or beyond, to make the decision so that the factory would receive the best quality cane in order to produce the best quality sugar. And that is precisely the kind of information that we're using to make proper decisions in the industry. Do you want me to speak to anything else? Minister? Want me to speak to anything else? Buckley? Okay. Now, in the transitioning of the factory, the industry itself, BMC, we have been requested by the authorities to utilize Carrington factory. The government wants to utilize that for another purpose. So we were able to shift the operations that we had at Carrington factory to Buckley. And we are also utilizing Buckley as a central point for two major plantations, Constant and Searles, so that we don't expect at any given point very soon to go back to put in a factory at Buckley at all. In fact, we think that Portville is an ideal location, especially when there's consideration to move to the next stage in the process of transitioning, that is renewable energy. So Portville, because it has access to the best biomass in Barbados, bagasse, will now become the central point for creating electricity from bagasse as a means of adding to the revenue base of the new company called BESCO, as well as increasing electricity production without reference to imported fuel. In fact, we're moving towards a more sustainable industry, not only by increasing output of cane, but also by utilizing the third product in cane. You have sugar, molasses, and bagasse. And even though the factory supplies or produces $2.5 million in electricity a year for itself, it has never been able to monetize the renewable energy, but we will be able to do so in the foreseeable future. That's the next stage. So that we are anticipating that the transitioning that we're doing will not only be viable from the perspective of sugar cane and molasses, but the additional renewable energy that will come from exploiting the byproduct called bagasse. That will then make this entire transition a complete transition in terms of its many facets. The economics of it, the finance of it, the environmental strengths of it. But I want to say here that contrary to the notion that the cane industry was dying, in the last 4 years, we have increased the production of cane in Barbados by almost 25%. But why is this important? It is important because you cannot have a sustainable non-sugar agriculture unless you have sugar agriculture, because you have to do rotation. And therefore, the notion that you can have a future agriculture without sugarcane is a joke. As a result of that, it means that we expect not only to be able to produce more cane in Barbados, from which we will get more sugar, but more importantly, we can produce more molasses. Because currently, we only supply 1/10 of the requirement of the rum industry. And if we can, in the future, increase our planting of sugarcane, which we've already started, and increase the quality of sugarcane, then there is tremendous scope, not only for the industry itself, but the development of non-sugar agriculture in the way we want to see it in order to pursue food security, as we are discussing, and we have discussed for the last couple of days. So the resuscitation of the sugar industry in Barbados is much more than the economics and the finance side of it. You have now, in fact, changed the sociology of the industry by making sure that the workers who have toiled for decades, centuries, are now owners, part owners of this industry. So when we look at the overall plan for the transitioning, we are going to be utilizing more of the lands that have been idle for quite a while in Barbados. The only constraint to the future of agriculture in Barbados will be the possible impacts of climate change and consequently, perhaps, the impact of climate change on the availability of water. But that too is being planned out by the ministry, and therefore the future of the entire agriculture sector looks safe when you analyze what has transpired over the last 3 to 4 years under the leadership of the current Minister of Agriculture. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman,
Proceed.
thank you, Minister and Chairman. You know, when I speak of Buckley Factory, I have a number of persons next to me, in front of me, behind me, not only from St. George South, but from across parishes, St. John, St. Philip. And while I don't want to get into the who closed down who or who closed down what, I still see Buckley Factory, the asset, becoming a community asset now, whereby those persons who have gone before me and who are also behind me and next to me were raised from earnings and toiling daily at that factory. And I would love to see, and I'm speaking on behalf of several persons, not only in St. George South and North, I would love to see that asset utilized in a way that could generate employment and for social good. I am hoping that within a short time frame, whether it's agritourism, is environment, is culture, that landscape that was a staple within the constituency and within the parish and within this country, not be left to simply rot away or decay. And my grandson and son will live to tell a story of the history of Buckley Factory as once being a sugar producing factory, but transitioned to become another staple being utilized not only for economic value, but I refer to it as a community asset for the social good for the people of St. George. And I will end on Buckley Factory there. But I move on to thank you again, Mr. Minister and team. The Farmers Empowerment and Enfranchisement Drive is indeed a wonderful program. And I have seen a number of young farmers, male and female, benefiting from this program. And while I don't want to get into the number of produce and the improvement of the agricultural sector and local production as a result of the feed program, what I can tell you, Mr. Minister and team, wherever I go in St. George, persons are requesting farmers' licenses. And that speaks volume to your program. And I want to compliment you for that program. But I want to go further, though, Minister and team. You know, I came from, when I entered public life, well, ministerial life, that Ministry of Commerce is a ministry I can never forget. The formation of co-ops were used as a mechanism to enfranchise working class and the average businessman. And we coupled that with the trust loan, the starting of the trust loan fund, to give over 4,000 small businesses the opportunity to start their own business. But within communities, I'm seeing, while this program has been one that we can boast of, and as the boys on the block will say, beat our chests, and you within the ministry, I still see a need for community co-op farming in this country, whereby the food program, yes, but we can utilize the concept to get into communities and community centers to get more young people, young men and women into the agricultural sector to boost food security and to give them the opportunity to earn a living, not only on these shores, but abroad. So I am asking if the ministry has considered, despite what you're doing, the excellent work you're doing here with the feed program, whether you have looked at community and co-op farming indeed to supplement the good work you have done here with the feed program. And that's my question to you, Minister.
Yeah, thanks, Honourable Member. I think the pace at which we are moving with Project CARE is something that concerns me, but Project CARE is everything that you just spoke about in terms of communities getting involved in farming and people going back to their kitchen gardens and creating a movement within communities that would drive production for those people within those communities to be able to consume or eat what they grow and grow what they eat. I am pushing very hard to get that project moving because I recognize the importance of it. Your colleague to your right also has been pushing for it to go as the Honourable Member for St. James South. And I think that we need to have a movement across the island where Barbadians are actually getting back to community gardening and kitchen gardening in their backyards. And I can give you the assurance that in this coming financial year, we will put in greater effort in making sure this project is actually up and running the way it should, and that every constituency is given a chance to at least have one project. I had a discussion with a private sector entity about Project CARE, how we can do a competition that will culminate around our independence celebration and provide a prize package, an awards ceremony for people who participate in community gardening, constituency by constituency, where you get a first, second, and third prize for the best community gardens. And I suppose we will have to work out the details in terms of what criteria will be, but this is a conversation that I've had with the private sector, and we will revisit that after these estimates and the budget so that we can anchor a possible overall community garden project for the country.
Thank you, Minister. And my final words, Chair. Very often, I find that persons try to do it on their own. And that is why I mentioned the co-op model. So we have to drive that co-op model within communities and with a view to allow them to get the end result faster and to create scale. So I just want to end on that note, but I recognize the Project CARE, but my focus is more on getting the co-op model within the communities more, and that persons will not be standalone entities, but the co-op model would give them the scale and the reach that they need and quicker. But I thank you, and indeed, again, you have been thorough.
Yeah, thanks, Honourable Member. I do agree with the co-op model. I think in order for us to get the movement going, we have to give it a start, like it's almost like a jump start, and then we can then organize and fashion how we can develop business models within it so that people can work in co-ops, and I accept that. The challenge for me, though, is how do we get people to work together? And I think the ministry is already working with people who are familiar with the formation of co-ops, and we will build on that so that we will continue to get this structure in place and to allow for us to have co-ops within the communities as well.
Honourable Member for St. Michael South Central.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My questions, I believe, are relatively straightforward. I want to thank the Minister for his explanation so far on some of the critical areas that we've been discussing. The first question I have is perhaps the simplest. Now, Minister, this ministry is responsible for a large part of the markets. And our approach to markets, the way that the ones that currently exist and the way that we structure them, it's in quite a long-term arrangement. So there are tenants, and people are able to access these stalls or kiosks or facilities in order to vend certain products. I think there is another model that perhaps of a market that perhaps serves a different kind of vendor or kind of entrepreneur. And that is the entrepreneur who perhaps has more occasional produce. We have across Barbados farmers markets in particular locations. There's one on the West Coast, there's one in the center of the country. There are perhaps one or two that have a particular character. They are set up, I think, as yes, to allow people to get produce and to have a bit of an entertainment experience, to go out with their families on the weekend. And they have a certain tenor, these farmers markets. But a farmers market experience must also be available and accessible to any and all Barbadians. The farmers market experience that attracts perhaps more subsistence farmers, people that are not necessarily farming as their main occupation, but from time to time have produce and goods that they want to sell. But equally, as an economic marketplace for those individuals, but also as an experience for all Barbadians. And Minister, I think that you get my meaning when I say all Barbadians. A space that people can go and feel nice. That everybody can have a farmer's market kind of experience in a place and in an environment that is accessible and, quite simply, Minister, feels nice. Some of the places that you would want me to go, Minister, on a weekend to do my shopping, I feel harassed. And while we enjoy the typical market experience that I grew up with, and still, when I go to get my fish and go to get my produce, I still go to Cheapside and so on. That is set up for the kind of vendor that is going to go there every day and that always has fish to sell, that always has produce to sell. The vendor that is looking to make some money. Sometimes I spoke in this honorable place a couple of days ago about when my mother was trying to send us overseas and might kill some chickens and might find a way to occasionally sell the produce that she occasionally has. So on the one hand, setting up entrepreneurs who have a space to vend that is more accessible so that they don't have that kind of single license or tenancy agreement with your ministry, but then also setting up something that is enjoyable for all people and accessible for all people outside of that typical farmer's market situation that we all know of. Are there any plans for that? What is the scope for that? What do you consider the value of that? That's my question.
Thank you, Honourable Member, and thanks for the question. Actually, you are just where my mind is at, and this is where I started in 2018, actually. So one may wonder how come you started there and you're still not there yet. And there are a number of issues. One, there was a silo approach to having these farmers markets set up right across Barbados. And I wanted to have them set up from independence right through to the week before Christmas, right across all 30 constituencies. There was a lot of effort that went into getting them done, but then the information that came back to me was that it wasn't going to be feasible because many of the farmers felt that they had other markets to attend to on weekends, and they didn't want to lose out on that opportunity. But equally, they wanted government to fund the whole exercise. And we came back to revisit it in 2019, and coming off that, whilst we were hoping to get it going, again, we had the same challenges. We were down in 2020 and 2021. 2022, we went into an election. I'm saying all this to you to say to you that I am keen on having farmers markets set up across Barbados. I have tried a few of them at the parochial level in St. Philip, and they have worked very well. Once we can get the sponsorship, once we can get the support to have these markets set up, we are definitely going in that direction. I have before me right now a request at BADMC to have a farmers market set up, which is constituted exactly the way you've just mentioned. That is not just a farmers market, but is a whole experience for a day. And when we roll out that would then give us the impetus for setting up others right across. But I completely agree that you cannot have the same experience by way of only public markets or vending zones, but that we can do temporary farmers markets to give people a completely different experience. The one that I have before me includes an entertainment package, so that is a completely different experience. And it sort of mirrors what we did for AgriFest, except that is not an expo, but just strictly a farmer's market. So yes, I agree, and it is not in our estimates at this point in time, but the Prime Minister did say to us that you can start here and come back later. So once we can create the correct model, we can actually set aside some kind of budgeting later on to establish the farmers markets across Barbados. I don't want to see a one-off thing. I want to see frequency, because we have a lot of farmers markets that happen right now. Brighton, for example, is about the best example. But I don't want to see just one farmers market. I want to see many. And therefore, I agree with you that this is something we should prioritize, and you can rest assured that coming off the estimates in the budget is something I'm going to look at for when we go back to the Prime Minister for further financing.
Thanks, Minister. Just as a follow-up suggestion, it may not be feasible to have 30 markets across 30 constituencies or even 11 markets across 11 parishes, but what you may want to consider is a north, central, south approach, or even a rolling marketplace where you're moving in between venues monthly, or just some tweaks to consider, given that you also be looking for the appropriate space. And we know that in Barbados, availability of suitable space for these things can be a challenge. I move on to I thank you for considering the suggestion, and move on to my second question. Minister, the Agricultural Development Fund has been, which is managed, quote unquote, by the Enterprise Growth Fund Limited. The fund, I dare say, is not set up to be only a social investment fund, even as social investments are needed. It is set up to provide resources to real viable agricultural products or companies, projects, products or companies or services that are going to help generate some job-led, inclusive growth in this country or even arguably in this region. Now, would like to hear from you, Minister, about what is the intention for the ADF with respect to, particularly with respect to, or need for it to support profitable enterprises. I have always been of the view that perhaps you may have to ring-fence some part of the fund for a development portion to say some percentage will be that we take a chance on this project because we believe that it has national purpose or value, but overall, the ADF is meant to be profitable and generate a return. So I wanted to hear your position on that and what are the future plans for the fund?
Thanks, Honourable Member. You may recall that when you were the Minister in charge, we did discuss how we would approach the ADF. And we had looked, I think, there were 4 pillars that we could have used in order for us to utilize the fund. Since then, nothing much has happened. But what I say to you is that based on the feedback that has been coming into the ministry, there are 2 things that I'm addressing. One, you are right, how do we carve out a space for developmental projects that are of national interest? And then 2, how do we treat the fund as a viable commercial fund where it can be profitable? And the one thing that really stood out in the conversations we've been having is the rate of interest. The question is, if you want to make it a viable commercial fund, do you have a special interest rate that is separate and apart from what is currently the commercial bank's rate, and treat the ADF as a fund that has a special interest rate based on the demands on the fund and based on what farmers want to deliver? And then 2, how do you look at how the fund can be used to provide a couple of things, grant funding in the case of a natural disaster, and then funding for special projects where perhaps there may be some SPVs until the projects are settled. We have not yet settled these conversations, but we are working on them. A number of requests came to me for renewable energy, where there are existing large-scale farmers who want to add renewable energy to their mix. And we are still in conversations with them as to how, one, we would treat to this as far as their responsibility to make sure that they're not moving away from our traditional agriculture, but using renewable energy as a means to profit, while creating challenges for us with traditional agriculture or contemporary agriculture using technology. So at this point, your questions are very good and very pointed, but we do not have, at this point in time, a settled position on where we are with the Agriculture Development Fund. And I can assure you that as the year goes by, especially when we get into the new financial year and we can get back to the recapitalization of the fund, that many of these changes will come to Cabinet for us to be able to address the future use of the Agriculture Development Fund. I trust I have addressed your question.
Thank you. I look forward.
And just to add to that, Honourable Member, we have a major issue where the cost to the ADF is just over $500,000 annually for the EGFL to manage the fund. And that is something we are also revisiting, because I believe that that's a substantial sum that can be used to do projects in agriculture.
Thank you, Minister. I'm hesitating because I'm trying to choose from the menu here. I'll settle on one final question. I'll settle on the one that stands at the nexus between your ministry, the ministry that you have some stewardship of, Minister, and the one of which I currently have some stewardship. Minister, as you know, I'm not one that is too quick or free with congratulations, but I will say that the work that you've done on plant protection and on some of the food safety and standards issues really has put the country in a good position with respect to the potential for export growth. And I really encourage you and us to continue in that regard. Similarly, the Barbados National Standards Institute, which is a part of the Ministry of Industry, Innovation, Science and Technology, has also been doing quite a bit of work in partnership with you to look at these issues of food safety and quality. And the orientation has mainly been with a view to export and to improve our exports. But as you and I have discussed from time to time, Minister, I have always seen a greater role to be played between the Ministry of Agriculture and Food and Nutrition Security, and the food and nutrition security is the part that I'm getting to, between that area and the question of standards of the things that we consume locally, the things that our people either grow and consume locally or import for our consumption in terms of food safety and quality and nutrition quality. And there are, in other jurisdictions, agencies that have this responsibility to be able to say to us, I'll use an example. We take a lot of intelligence from other jurisdictions about the things that we should eat during the life cycle of a person in Barbados and the region. So for example, we will say to women who are pregnant, you should perhaps not consume certain kinds of foods. You should not consume fish that is high in mercury. And we very loosely decide which fish those are, but we're not really talking about the fish that we fish in our waters. We are using as the benchmark the international standards, or probably more likely the US Food and Drug Administration guidance on, well, which fish, swordfish, tuna, because they are looking at the international markets for these fish. Where are they coming from? The waters in which they are mostly fished from, what is the heavy metal content there? And that's where a lot of the guidance comes from. But, you know, we are finding in our populations, in our majority populations in Barbados and this region, that there's certain pathologies, human disease and so on, that are manifesting that we don't understand. And I'm concerned that we are not making the connection. Yes, we are testing and we're establishing standards for the food that we feed other people with, and we are very concerned that that food is healthy and meets these particular standards. But what about the food that we eat? And both with respect to imports and with respect to what we grow and so on for ourselves and what we harvest and gather for ourselves, at what point are we going to establish an authority that sets our own guidance and benchmarks for what we eat? Is there any plan? Is there any intention? And I concede that that must be in partnership with the BNSI. But is there any intention from your perspective, Minister, to make that a priority of what you deliver to the people of Barbados through your ministry?
Honourable Member, that is one of the good questions I've had for the day. Truthfully, this exercise has been quite encouraging. I'm indeed pleased with the response I've received from my colleagues today. And the questions, the very pointed questions in terms of keeping the public aware of what A, the ministry is doing, and B, what is possible, so that we can address what we're currently doing, but also keep the country appraised of the pathway to the future. We took a paper to Cabinet, I believe, in 2020, 2021, where we looked at the whole issue of standards, food safety, establishing a single unit that would be totally independent from the ministries. That is Ministry of Agriculture, Ministry of Commerce, Ministry of Health. And the reason why we did that, because we thought that between ministries, it became too territorial to achieve the results we want at the pace that we wanted it at. And that to establish a single unit would have been the preferred way. We did look at the Canadian model, and that is the model that we thought would have worked for us. We then had FAO assist us with a consultant to work out how it will work and how we would address the standards in terms of food safety, which would address all of what you mentioned in terms of food that we import, food from jurisdictions that we would have to look at carefully. This is something that the Chief Agriculture Officer is extremely passionate about. Equally, the Chief Veterinary Officer is also passionate about it. And I think these two gentlemen are in a good position to address what you've raised in terms of food safety, which is legislation we are currently working on, trying very hard to get that legislation anchored between us and the Ministry of Health. And the whole issue of harmonization between ministries sometimes can be a very difficult exercise, and that's the hardcore reality that we face. So that the establishment of a single unit, which is allowed to function independently, but is able to give us the deliverables that we need, is where I think we need to go. Honourable Member, what I would do is ask the Chief Agriculture Officer, Mr. Michael James, to speak to this matter, and then after him, Dr. Mark Trotman, so you get a sense of understanding of where we have been with this matter. It has been a long journey, and one that we hope to settle very soon, because when we submitted the cabinet paper, we were talking about $100 million, I think it was. That price obviously is going to be a lot more now. And what we wanted to do is to establish that unit with the assistance of the FAO and the consultant that was on board with us, and to use the Canadian model so that we would have a unit that can deal with food safety and standards. And yes, it did include your ministry as it stands right now.
Thank you, Minister, and thank you, Minister Ketter, for the question. The umbrella agency we were speaking about is National Agricultural Food and Health Food Control Agency, NAFCA. That was the acronym at that point in time. And as the minister said, we've been working on this for nearly 15 years. So it's been a long time coming. At the international level, through the same sanitary and phytosanitary program or issues or methodologies, there are three bodies that have been given carte blanche to look at issues relating to these things. So you have the IPPC, International Plant Protection Convention, which looks at plant health. You have the World Organization for Animal Health, WOA, which looks at the animal health. And you have Codex Alimentarius, which looks at the whole issue of food safety. In this case, in Barbados, that nexus with respect to food safety is the part that has been missing. We have been able to look at animal health and plant health, and Mark will speak to the animal health issue. But when it comes to food safety, there always seemed to be this, must be delicate in this sort of way, but persons tend to think that you're fighting for turf. And no matter what was projected or what was put forward, there was always this, you know, we're not ready or something else should happen. What NAFCA seek to do, and is still on the table, is that even if you don't have an agency, you have a system that would help persons that if in case, as you were saying, that things come from overseas, there's a testing methodology. There are times when you have to test, no matter where it comes from. We usually think that because something comes from overseas, it's better than what's produced here. And that, in most instances, can be a fallacy. So it would have to, or we were seeking to develop a system, and Brett Taylor was also involved in this, where we had traceability, similar to what exists now under the FSMA Act in the United States of America. And we had persons trained just last week in the whole area of traceability, how you will make sure that farmers or whoever is doing things to their food stuff, that they go through taking records, making sure that you know what chemical you're using, when you put on water, how safe is the water being tested? All of these things are in documents, they're there. It takes the will now to actually go forward and decide, are we gonna have a single unit, as was decided, or are we gonna have a system? Whatever we do, the Barbadian public should be the beneficiaries. You need to be able to say to persons, if you're drinking water, if you're eating food, this has gone through some sort of testing model, and this is what we're doing. Right now, it is fragmented. Sometimes you don't have the cooperation between the units. We depend a lot on personal agreements. So I know Mark, so I know what Mark is doing. Mark may know somebody in the Ministry of Health, they know what he's doing, but there's not that cohesion that is needed. And that is what NAFCA sought to do. The thing about NAFCA is that it was always plaguing the minister, and PS know this, with having persons to actually push this. We've depended on primarily one person, and that is Dr. Beverly Wood. And that's a single point of failure. When Beverly isn't there, what happens? So you needed to have persons to be with Beverly so that they know what happens when she's no longer there, if she's retired or whatever. And we didn't have that. So right now, we are in this sort of, how should we say, stopgap measure, where we have developed the legislation, and the legislation is there to be looked at and reviewed by other agencies, but it's just stuck there. So we need to have, from all the players, to be on that same mindset to say, listen, you know, leave the ego at the door and let us concentrate on what we are doing, because it's supposed to benefit all Barbados. And I think it will stop there and let Mark take over from here.
Thank you very much. Not a lot more I can add to that. I think CAO has pretty much laid out what we've been trying to do. In a nutshell, what we have been trying to do is to make sure that we can monitor the entire food chain from start to finish, including inputs, additives, and everything that goes into the final product that people eat. And to make sure that across the entire food chain, there is some sort of regulatory oversight to make sure that there is no adulteration, there is no infection, there is no contamination, that the inputs, whether it be animals, whether it be plants, whether it be seeds, whether it be chemicals, that they all, at that point, are safe to consume, and that the process is safe to consume. So that was the idea that we were trying to put, as the CEO mentioned. The real challenge is that there has been perception over somebody taking somebody else's responsibility, turf over certain issues and so on. And that has never been the intention at all. I think we're making progress. We had Mr. Paul Mayers, who is a Barbadian, retired official with the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, who has graciously donated his time with the FAO's support to assist us in, because he was instrumental in establishing the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, worked many years as a senior officer in that agency. And so he's a wealth of knowledge, and he's been helping us come together with that. So we think we've made a lot of progress. We've managed to bring people on board who understand what we're trying to achieve. We're about to engage in a program, again, sponsored by the FAO, a food safety management system, our food safety management tool, an evaluation tool which allows us to see exactly where we are at and what we need to do to put these things in place. It's a fairly ambitious goal that we have, but I do believe that once we get enough commitment at all levels and get enough systems in place to make sure that Mike referred to the challenge with people coming and going and getting inconsistency. That it's been a sine curve with us trying to get this thing going, because, you know, you think you have everything together, but because it was always based on individual relationships, when someone retires or leaves or so on, we have to start all over again. So, you know, there was a calypso a long time ago, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. We experienced that ourselves with this project. I'm very optimistic that we are on the right foot going forward with it, and that you'll probably see something more concrete coming out of it over the next year, where we actually have something, whether we end up with a full discrete agency, independent agency, staffed and operational, or whether we have a series of MOUs or concordats or agreements between ministries to operate within their respective structures. I think we still need to address that issue and have a positive way forward on that. But with the new way we're moving forward on it, I'm very optimistic that we will get something concrete very soon. It also speaks into to the Honourable Minister for St. James South has been talking about SPS issues constantly. I know I've engaged her very often on that matter. And this is really what we're talking about, if you want to go down that road. This is really what we're talking about, being able to have this system to satisfy our SPS obligations, so we can not only make sure that there is food that is safe for the Barbadian consumer, but also can be exported anywhere in the world once we meet that standard. Thank you.
Minister and colleagues, I really have to thank you for the frankness of these responses. My sister, who's no longer with us, used to say, if you don't left home, you don't find out anything. And I feel like this has been a real education in where you are in this process. I'll close by saying, apart from saying thank you, I'll close by saying that if there's one thing that it's now 8 years in political service has taught me, it is that there is, in these matters, no room for ego and no room for jostling for turf. Because in the meantime, the people whom we serve, are not receiving the full benefit of that service from us. And so I am satisfied that if that is the only matter, the only or the primary issue, that we can certainly put that to bed, I would like to believe. But I will also say that your challenge with people retiring out of the work and leaving gaps is also a challenge that systems will solve. If we set up the correct systems, the correct standard operating procedures, the correct process and methodology for what we're doing, as both the gentlemen who spoke after you, Minister, know and practice, if we're able to do that, then we have a way forward. I will tell you that I am not a fan of MOUs between agencies of the same government to do a single task. I feel that we set up a multi-agency system and structure it properly with particular roles for each actor, then we have a way forward. I am pledging to you, Minister, in this honorable chamber, that certainly in my capacity as Minister currently responsible for industry, that you have our partnership through BNSI in these matters. And I don't hope, because hope is not a strategy, but I know that we will come to execution on this matter. I thank you.
Honourable Member, I really want to thank you for raising this matter. because this has been outstanding for too long. I think the country stands to benefit substantially from getting this single unit in place. Whilst I'm not adamant about anything, there are certain things that you must accept them for what they are and what they can deliver. And my simple position on this has been the same. When I listened to all that was presented to me, when I first went to the ministry, I felt as though the harmonization that this needed would not be achieved through various ministries. And I agree with you that even if we take a MOU approach, you still would not have dealt with the territorial issues. And therefore, I am happy that you have committed to us that the NSI will be on board in solving what I personally think is a simple problem to solve. And that I hope that the same wisdom will prevail across all the other agencies. I want to thank you again for raising this and do look forward to working with you going forward on this matter.
Thank you. Honourable Member for St. Michael, Honourable Member for Christchurch, East Central.
Thank you very much, Chair. I must thank the Honourable Member for St. Michael, South Central, because yesterday morning, my wife specifically told me to ask the very question that she ended on in this chamber, because the sentiment, if you like, in relation to health and outcomes and what we consume, given that we have tried to focus on achieving food security and nutritional security, that these are issues that continue to plague the country given our profile, certainly with NCDs. So I want to thank the Honourable Member for asking the question. I can report to my wife that the question was asked and answered, even though I didn't get the opportunity to raise it myself. But it is an important issue, and to the extent that we are capable of changing hearts and minds in relation to what we consume, I know that this is going to be an important intervention in that process. Now, Minister, I just have a couple of what I believe are very simple questions, and I will start by saying quite plainly, as you are well aware, and your officials in the ministry, that there's simply too much teeth in Barbados. And I say that within the context of agriculture. One of my brothers, I think the back end of 2022, had 4 sheep, sir, grazing in urban Barbados, St. Michael, and had those 4 sheep stolen from him. And as a government, I know that we've tried our best to try to encourage young people to get into agriculture and to make investment in agriculture. And it is a problem that continues to plague this sector that I don't know the total solution, but I would like to know from you in terms of biotagging, whether that's something that, given the advanced technologies, that we can use much more effectively. But I want, before you answer that question, the Milton Lynch Primary School, they have a small kitchen garden, as we would say. And Milton Lynch Primary School is the only all-boys primary school in Barbados. And it is instructive that the school, having started this project, Chair and Minister, that people actually went and stole the produce from students, from little boys who we want to see that there's an opportunity for getting involved in production, something productive to feed yourself. Issues of nutrition. So when we're talking about food miles, farm to table, the concept is real if you introduce it from a very young age in school. And whilst that was not livestock, the reality is those boys were disappointed. The school then had to spend money erecting a fence and barbed wire to be able to grow a simple set of cabbage and lettuce and the like, which is not something that you want to put in the minds of young boys so early, but it is a disgrace, Minister. And I think that whilst I know that the ministry really does not have the capability or the capacity to be everywhere at all times, and it's not necessarily your specific role in this case, but I think it's important that between whatever technology that we can deploy, the biotagging, as I said, in the case of the sheep, so that people don't spend their time 4, 5, 6 months investing their time to go and make sure that the sheep are taken care of, only in the dead of night for somebody to come and capsize your investment, basically, because there's no return for that small investment in that case. And I know that must be happening multiple times over. And it really is a disservice to young men that we want to get involved in agriculture and to do the right thing. So, Minister, I hope that you would hear from my voice that we need to do something both technologically, but certainly within the context of our communities, because I know there was some discussion about community agriculture. And I wouldn't want that we go and encourage people to invest in community agriculture only for people within either the communities or other communities to come and steal the very things that people are growing, when we know that we are starting these things with good intent, but we don't have necessarily the capacity to be able to ensure that that investment, however small, can be protected. So I just want to hear from you in relation to livestock. What are the latest options available for people for biotagging, so that at least people can be aware as to where their livestock happens to be at any given point in time? And just more broadly speaking, in relation to, and I'm going to have a follow-up question on the school component, because I think as we introduce the school nutrition policy, I'm going to expand on that secondly. But I want to hear your views in terms of the biotagging as it relates to the livestock.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Let me go straight to Dr. Mark Trotman, because yesterday we dealt with this in detail. Yes, I do recognize that you weren't in chamber yesterday when we dealt with this, so not just for you, but for all of Barbados, for us to reinforce what we are doing for livestock and what we are doing in terms of traceability of the crops, which I spoke of yesterday. I just mentioned to my permanent secretary that after these estimates and the budget, we're going to have to go back to the ministry and take lead on what is happening with prairie larceny. And this is going to involve meeting with the Barbados Police Service again and the Barbados Defense Force, but equally making sure that there's a system within the ministry where receipts or some bill of lading are issued to people who are involved, so that a system is created, you can collect the data from it, and there could be a monitoring mechanism in place for us to handle this problem. Minister, my heart bleeds to hear that you have young children involved in agriculture, and invariably who is really stealing their crops may not necessarily be young children. And that is a fundamental point of takeaway for me. And it speaks to where we are as a country. Because as I have said yesterday, this is not just a policing issue. This is an issue of intelligence and human behavior. And that we can reach a point in our existence where even children crops are being stolen speaks to where the mindset is at and how people are prepared to do anything at all to achieve what it is they want to achieve without blood, sweat, and tears. And that breaks my heart. It really makes my heart bleed to hear of such a situation. Now, for me, when I was growing up, St. Philip Boys School, we planted crops because agriculture science was part of what we did at St. Philip Boys School. And I recall eggplants staying on the trees and nobody taking them until they actually dropped off. And you reach a point now in our existence where children are trying to do something in agriculture and their crops are stolen. I'm prepared to stick my neck out and say they were not stolen by children. And you would have to ask yourself, why would adults behave like that? The same thing applies to livestock, so that our mission is for children to have a black belly sheep. May not be every child, may not be every household. But if we can do this as part of our Million Heads Black Belly Sheep project between Barbados and Guyana, then we would have been able to carve out a space for children, one, to be disciplined, as we were when we were growing up, but two, to start to understand ownership from an early age. And that you would tell me there's a notion that people feel that they can go and steal those animals, as you have just reported about having animals stolen from someone that you are close to, tells me that we are not in a good place in the mindset of Barbadians who are prepared to continue to do these things to innocent Barbadians. And let me get Dr. Trotman to speak to what the ministry is doing in terms of microchips, and then for Michael James to speak to how we are going to approach crops and what can possibly be done based on his experience in the ministry and what approach we started to take previously. Dr. Trotman.
Thank you, Minister. As I said yesterday, the ministry has embarked on a program of animal identification and traceability. It is the goal of the program is more than just predial larceny, addressing predial larceny, which is obviously a major concern. The idea is to be able to identify animals from birth right through slaughter. And again, it is part of the SPS requirements as well too, so you can bring in, you want to be able to, I'll talk about the traceability first. You want to be able to track an animal right through its life cycle, right through its death cycle, so to speak, where the meat is then presented for consumption. So that if there is an issue with respect to meat being contaminated or infected or anything like that, you can trace that piece of meat right back to the farm it came from, and any issues in the farm that might have caused the adulteration that manifested itself at the point of consumption of the meat. That's one of the purposes of this traceability program. Another reason for the traceability program is to assist farmers in managing their flocks. If you have a centralized database of the animals, the farmers can use that in their own management systems to manage their animals, the movement of their animals, even down to what kind of diet the animal gets, depending on productivity and so on. So it's a tool that farmers can use to assist in their management of their animals. And the third reason for the traceability is, again, to identify ownership of the animal, so that if an animal is presented to, for example, a slaughterhouse, the microchip will detect the ownership of that animal, and you will know whether the animal has been presented by its owner, or whether it has been stolen and then is being slaughtered by someone who was stolen the animal. And then, of course, if the animal does get stolen live and is found, then it can trace it back to the owner. The system that we have in place is not a biotracking system. It cannot track the movement of an animal around the country. And while that would probably be ideal and admirable, it's something we will have to look at and see what the costs associated that with. Biotracking is a different system, much more expensive system, and more cumbersome system as well too. But that's not to discount its possibility, but the current system we're using identifies the animal permanently. It is a microchip, which is a device about the size of a grain of rice that is implanted under the skin of the animal. To remove it would require a surgical operation if you can identify where it is. So it's pretty feel safe in terms of being put in the animal's place. It's being put in a place that just can't be simply cut out or cut off. So that's another benefit of it. So what we have, and we have started to, as of really now, we're starting to roll it out. We've had a pilot project that has went on for about a year now. We're satisfied that it's very effective. And we're now inviting farmers to participate by contacting us where we can implant the microchip and record their information. The central database will contain all of the farmers' information so that they can be contacted in the event of a theft or even of a missing animal being caught and rounded up. So that is being rolled out now. We expect, farmers can contact us. We will send a team to go and do it, or they can contact a private veterinarian who will be able to do it. We will give them the microchip and the tools to do it, and they can do it on behalf of the farmer as well too. So I hope that clarifies what this project is. It is a definitive identification of the animal, and the idea is that it's not only used to try to address theft, but also used from a sanitary and phytosanitary perspective to trace the animal through its entire life, through to slaughter, and even connect it on to a database of the meat, which we also have traceability to deal with that through the production chain, and also to assist the farmer in managing their own flock within the confines of their flock. Thank you.
Thank you for the question, Minister.
Before you begin, Officer, just let me say that we have another 15 minutes to complete this today. And therefore, I'm asking everyone, I want to give you the opportunity, but I'm asking you to be extremely crisp. No long speeches, to the point, and let's try to finish this on time, including everybody. Thank you.
All right, just briefly, way back in the early 2000s, we would have had a senior officer, Dr. Blackman, who would have started the whole issue of doing a PR on the whole issue of prairie larceny, where you planted signs and saying that this is being patrolled. And so they've done a number of things. I think what we would need to do, and you use the word correctly, thieving is a societal norm, it's a societal thing, it's a societal problem, it seems now in Barbados. And what you may have to do, and what the ministry may help with, is to use drones and whatever to map your fields. So therefore, a guy with half an acre of yams, let's say you get 5,000 pounds to the acre, which means that he should only get about 2,500 pounds. There is no way that that guy should be selling yams over and over to somebody knowing that he can only get 2,500 pounds. You get me? So he can't be selling when you only get 2,500 pounds, but you're selling 10,000. Something is wrong with that. So maybe you will have to have that sort of technology where persons know exactly what you have, and maybe that is one case, one area we can look into. I'm just speaking off the fly because it is something that really we have to sit down, really come up with answers, and it takes everybody to come up with some sort of answer. Yeah?
Thanks very much. I know that it's not a straightforward solution, but in the meantime, people are losing their investments every day, and therefore the ministry, working with the stakeholders, is going to have to be much more aggressive with the education to ensure that people are aware as to what options they have available to them. Now, Minister, I raised the point of the school nutrition policy in the context of the farming projects and programs within primary schools in particular, because I know that I can tell what it costs to treat NCDs in the country, and that is increasing every year. And therefore, as we expand in relation to the programs for agriculture within primary schools, can you just elaborate in terms of the process? Because I think it is important that we also signal to the country that the interventions within the primary school setting is not just for the purpose of being able to earn a living or to get the technical knowledge that relates to agriculture. But this really is part of changing the trajectory in relation to how what we eat, what we use to rear these crops, and therefore in the long term helping us to be able to bring down the cost in associating with treatment of NCD. So can you just expand very quickly on the ministry's work in terms of engaging all schools, but particularly the primary schools, to ensure that we can meet the objectives as outlined within the school nutrition policy?
Thank you, Honourable Member. There are a couple of things that I perhaps need to make clear. Back in 2018-19, we signed on to an FAO protocol that allowed for us to work through the school feeding system. It was called Parliamentary Fronts Against Hunger, and this dealt specifically to how we treat nutrition within schools. Since then, we have been working with the Ministry of Education in terms of developing agricultural projects within schools across the island. And then we have had conversations with the Ministry of Health. The Ministry of Health actually anchors a nutrition unit, and based on the requirements and the objectives of that unit, then the agricultural sector will be pressed into action to make sure that we can produce the type of foods that are required in order for them to achieve their objectives. This obviously, again, will take harmonization across ministries, and I am confident that in this instance, that harmonization will take place, because I do accept that nutrition must be anchored at the Ministry of Health and Wellness. Nutrition can be supported through the Ministry of Agriculture in that our mandate as a Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Nutrition Security is in producing healthy food so that people can have access to healthy food. Food security basically is about people having access to food daily at an affordable price and at food that is healthy. That is basically the UN objective when they speak to food security. Nutrition security speaks to the type of food that is being produced and the type of information that is being disseminated to the public to create a wave or movement towards healthy living, healthy eating, including diet and exercise as part of the entire modality. So that whilst we accept and acknowledge that our role is basically to anchor food security and nutrition security, the work of the Ministry of Health and Wellness cannot be ignored, because they have to anchor how people behave, how they eat, what sort of programs are in place for diet and exercise, and how we manage and control NCDs. I agree that we have to start this within the primary schools and also within secondary schools, and that's the reason why the program that we are rolling out right now with the greenhouses that we have to put in place, or the greenhouses that we need to set up. The project does include schools as well, and perhaps Mr. Ennis from the BADMC can speak to this. And what we are prepared to commit to is that we make healthy, affordable food available to the people of Barbados, and that in this commitment that we are going to roll out a program with the schools to make sure that children are involved, first of all, to have an experience in agriculture using technology, and then to have a clear understanding as to why healthy eating and healthy food has to be produced in Barbados. So, Mr. Innes, you may want to speak to the greenhouse project that we are doing. We already have the greenhouses in possession. It's just for us to set them up. And now will be a good time to tell Barbadians how we are going to set up that project and how the schools will be involved.
Yes, thank you, Minister. So the proposed approach, there are 50 of those greenhouses, 25 were donated, 25 purchased. We are looking to have them spread across the country, really. Primary schools, secondary schools, including the BCC and then SJPI have also been engaged. I think we've also spoken to the BWU as their training college. So there are plans to engage across the tertiary and primary and secondary entities, and looking to actually have them set up on site for use in both training and also production of leafy greens and a number of other crops that are being proposed undercover. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Minister, I hope that those greenhouses will come with a level of security that should the students be able to produce. I'm being very serious. That once they produce, that they can actually have those produce harvested, because this is important for us to be able to signal to the country and to those very young people why it is important to engage in the process. Because engaging in the process and seeing it through to conclusion will be the most genuine intervention that we can make as it relates to agriculture in this country, if we want to show how serious it is for us as a country to have this matter addressed. Because the amount of stealing that's out there, I fear that we may very well be turning people away inadvertently if we don't upfront make the necessary provisions to at least be able to mitigate against the risk. Finally, Minister, I know you've been here for 2 days, and your officers, and I'm standing between you and your further deliberations. But it would be remiss of me if I didn't know that I heard some of it yesterday, but I think it's important as we reaffirm our lead within the CARICOM space as the country responsible for leading the implementation of the single market and the single economy. And the Ministry of Agriculture between Guyana and Suriname, but particularly Guyana for sure, we have been working to put in place the necessary mechanisms for the trading agreements, on the agriculture side, but also the technical requirements from a customs perspective, given that we have signaled that we want to have the food terminal set up in Barbados as part of achieving the objective of reducing our food import bill by 25% by 2025. Now, it is March 2024, and I know you may have touched on this already, but I feel it's important that the questions that I asked you about the production at the primary level, and I'm talking about the schools now, and how we engage young people as part of the process, is going to be important for us to be able to measure that the produce that they are able to deliver, Minister, is part and parcel of how they, as children in Barbados, can help achieve that objective. So I just want you to just reinforce the point that whilst we've been talking at the macro level in relation to this reduction, I want you to just remind Barbadians that they too are part of the process in relation to us being able to achieve that, and that the ministry, and explain how the ministry will be able to monitor to help us be able to achieve those objectives.
Thank you, Honourable Member. First of all, I wish to thank you for underscoring the importance of making sure that when we set up the greenhouses at the schools, that there's an element of security. And that helps me to remind you that there's a cost to security, and therefore I'll be calling upon you to make sure we can invest in the level of security that is required to make sure that we can protect those systems when they're installed at the schools.
No problem, sir.
But in all seriousness, we have, as Barbadians, to recognize that we all have a role to play in all of this. And truthfully, the schools really should be isolated for anybody wanting to go there and thief crops. That's my honest opinion. Judge me however you may feel, but I think that going to schools to steal crops is really truly a place that Barbadians should never find themselves. And that is my personal opinion, one that I will not divert from, and neither would I apologize for it. Equally, I mean, between school and church, we were taught not to steal. So that if somebody can go in on the school premises and steal crops, I think fundamentally something is wrong with that person. And it is not anything to do with struggle or anything to do with anything else. It's just a case of somebody just being just as callous as they possibly could be and don't care for what the implications may be psychologically or otherwise when they tamper with the children's crops. I am prepared to do what it takes to make sure that when we set up those greenhouses, that between the Ministry of Education and the Ministry of Agriculture, we can look at how we can forge ahead. They put in the best security in place where those are concerned. And I want to give you the calm assurance that yes, we are definitely going to be working through the schools to make sure that children understand the importance of food and nutrition security. And then I can only call on all Barbadians to get on board to make sure that when we are out there as a ministry, doing what we have to do to give us food security and give us nutrition security, that Barbadians are prepared to do what is also necessary for them to help us to deal with issues that are confronting the sector. And the major issue right now is predial larceny and then water. And I am going to do my best to deal with the water issues, but I think it takes collective effort between us and all Barbadians to deal with the issue of predial larceny. And that is the reason I am giving my firm commitment to go back and revisit this issue and take leadership on it after the estimates and the budget to give us a blueprint for how we are going to tackle this issue of predial larceny using the legislation that has been proclaimed March last year.
Thank you very much, Chair, Minister. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Now, I will just allow the two members who have indicated they wish to speak, but let me also add, this is no time for a long run-up. You come to the wicket, deliver the ball, and let's go. Honourable Member for St. James North.
Thank you, Honourable Chairman. No long run-up, just to give encouragement to this ministry for the work they're doing as they seek to increase our food security. I hope that they continue in their thrust to have people with disabilities involved in agriculture, an initiative that has been started 2 years ago. I fully support whatever this ministry does to try to stamp out predial larceny. And to say it effectively, I have no empathy for those who suffer reprisals as they commit the predial larceny, and that is the truth. My two questions, Mr. Chairman, relate to access to land in the feed program or land for the landless program for my constituents. I know Minister and his team spoke earlier today on layers and the pine, but still there are a few constituents of mine who are having difficulty accessing any land, and I would like clearly spelled out for their sake and for others, I'm sure, how you go about, how can they go about accessing this land? What is the capacity? Are we overburdened right now in terms of the access to the land? I know we heard earlier today about number of acres at Pine and Bath and other parts of Barbados, but how actually do people go about acquiring this land and not being kept on a waiting list for an undue length of time? And my second question, sir, relates to what is the ministry doing to try and change the mindset of Barbadians, the mental wherewithal now that we need to eat more local food rather than all the imported food to cut down, not only, to increase our better nutritional and health, but also to cut down on the humongous foreign exchange that we spend on an annual basis on imported food. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Very good, Honourable Member. Proceed.
Chair, thank you. Honourable Member, I would quickly ask the CEO of BADMC or Dr. Andrele, who we haven't heard for the whole day, to speak to how people can get access to land. But this is a very simple exercise through the BADMC.
Yes, thank you, Minister. I will just, in terms of the process, it is literally just an application through our website. The challenge in terms of allocation, however, it is more a case of greater demand than there is supply. I will say that there is a effort under the way in relation to some lands from BACT, which is currently being wound down, to come over to the BADMC. The challenge is I couldn't give a firm timeline. There is a legal process that is undergoing. Right, so in terms of the actual process for getting land, there is a training cadre that each 6 months or 3 months we actually go through for persons who are applying. Once they have submitted that application, they would be put into the next training cadre, and we would proceed with that training whilst we're working through the legal process to access the additional lands.
Just to be clear, you said an application to the BADMC website?
Yes, so on the badmc.org website, there is a link under the feed program, and they can actually submit their application there, and that will put them into the queue to be in the next training cadre.
And how is the capacity now in terms of the land? Do we need more land, or do we have sufficient land available for the demand?
Well, the current districts that we have, there is a rotation. Persons are, unfortunately, some persons are coming off, but others are being placed who would have been in the queue waiting. New persons coming in, as I said, we are working to get access to some additional plantations that would have been formerly under sugar. So we are hoping that that process will come to an end relatively soon. But again, I don't have the specifics as to when that will be announced, but once we do have that completed, we would be working to place persons as quickly as we could.
Okay. And Minister, the mindset of Barbadians.
I think I'll just answer that other one because very quickly, I must admit that we've been tackling the issue of public education in a sporadic way. I don't think that we were as systematic as we should have been as a ministry in reaching out to the public to encourage them as much as we could to get involved in agriculture, to grow what they eat and to eat what they grow. There used to be a program though that was at the ministry that even predated my assignment there. But what I can tell you is that it is recognized and we have budgeted for, it's like an education campaign with the help of a professional, and we're hoping that through that rollout in the coming financial year, that we would be more effectively and more systematically get across the word to Barbadians.
Well, so I certainly would encourage you all to have more public education in this regard. So I thank you, Honourable Chairman.
Thank you, Honourable Member for St. Andrew. You still.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for recognizing me. My first question has to do with land. One of the challenges that we have in St. Andrew, and I'm sure that similar challenges faced across the Scotland district. My neighbor in St. Joseph has a similar challenge where there's limited land. There's a lot of land for agriculture, but there's limited land for housing. And we have been losing a number of our residents as a direct result of the inability of persons to find land on which to build. The fact that the constituency of St. Andrew consists of 5 parishes is a good indication of the low numbers in terms of the population in St. Andrew itself. Now, there's a phenomenon in St. Andrew where a lot of the best land, the flatlands, are taken up in agriculture. And of course, I understand the importance of this. But at the same time, for modern agricultural sector, I think one of the things that one could expect is that you would be able to get a greater yield from less space or less land. So in terms of going forward and the fact that your sector, your ministry will be looking to produce more from less, if this could perhaps free up some of that very flat land, those very flat lands in certain parts of St. Andrew where it's now taken up with agriculture, and some of that consideration could be given for some of that land to be used for other reasons, mainly for housing development. I know it's not a conversation that will be had by just one ministry. It will involve other ministries, certainly the housing ministry, but I just want, for the sake of the people in St. Andrew who would want to have access to some lands, some very flat lands, of the few flat areas in St. Andrew that's taken up now with fruit trees. Some of that land at some point could be used, could be shared with housing for the purpose of residential houses, solutions in housing solutions in St. Andrew. That's one question. I'm going to ask all 3 one time. Next one, I know you would have spoken earlier, and certainly the member for St. Microsoft referenced the fact that we are seeing a lot more land now being used for agriculture. Land that was allowed to live fallow for a long time is now being utilized. Certainly in Turner's Hall, we intend to use that land for agriculture. It's been laying in bush for a while, and part of the challenge is water in that part of St. Andrew. Now, we know we have dams in Highgate, we have dams in Bordens. In Turnasol, I'm not aware of any dams. I know the area is hilly, but I also know that rivers or streams pass through that area where millions of gallons of water flow through and go into the sea. I'm wondering if there are any plans in your ministry at some point to tap into those water sources further upland so that persons in those higher elevations can have access to some of the water that flows through there freely, sometimes all year round. Of course, there are some farmers who may have the wherewithal to tap into it on their own. They have pumps, they have created little dams and so on and so forth, and they're using the water, but there are others who lack the wherewithal. And for the benefit of those farmers, some of whom are now starting out, some of whom benefited from your feed program that I would want to commend you for, and your care program. If there's anything certainly in these estimates going forward to help facilitate those farmers in those higher elevations. And the last question, your care program, especially and your feed program, I don't know how many iterations of this program that you've had over the years, but it's been around for at least a few years now. So I'm wondering if there's any plans to assess the program with the view of enhancing it. I know there's some persons who would have started out, but they still encounter some challenges along the way in terms of producing and marketing their produce. If you're looking at this program with the view of at some point further enhancing that program to capture those persons who, even with the assistance and the support that they get from you right now, still struggle to produce. So those are my 3 questions in a nutshell. Thank you.
Thank you, Honourable Member. Let me start where you ended off. The feed program allows for the BADMC to work with farmers producing and to help take off some 40% of what they're producing. And if that system is working, then farmers should not have a real challenge being able to get rid of some of their produce. Then we have several vendors right across the island that take produce from farmers. And I would urge the BADMC to get in contact with those who are having a challenge so that we can work with them and, if necessary, put together a marketing program on their behalf. As we move forward, we are moving the BADMC to what is really supposed to be Barbados Agriculture Development and Marketing Cooperation. And for us to do that, it's going to take some financing. We have to actually relook the entire BADMC structure to do what we call deconstruct and reconstruct. And that is being worked on currently, so stand by. There's a lot to come. But let me say to you that there are small farmers that we are assisting with cultivation. We give them drip irrigation. We give them water connections. We cultivate the land for them. But you will find then that those farmers also still, after you've given them the planting material, and I've had instances of this, I don't really want to be misunderstood, but I think if this entire project is going to work, farmers need to recognize their role and responsibility as well. It is not a free-for-all exercise. So that when you reach the stage where people are now asking you to come and do the harvesting, you know that there's a huge misunderstanding of what the concept really is supposed to be. And that is where I'm urging the BADMC to drill down into what is happening and to make sure that there is clear communication between them and the farmers where this project is concerned. Yes, we have challenges with water, and we are working on how we can put reservoirs in place. I know that borehole testing is taking place at Mount Poyer, and we are going to do a mix of things to help farmers. To the answer of tapping into springs, yes, we have started a project tapping into the Springart River, and that can be replicated right across Barbados, but it is going to take some time for us to build out an entire water augmentation program, given our limited resources. So that I want to say yes to the honorable member, that we want to work with the constituents of St. Andrew, and certainly where Turner's Hall Woods is concerned, we will look at how we can deal with that, but I am cognizant of the fact that the Scotland District is one that we have to be careful with in terms of how we start to excavate and remove trees, etc. And maybe a greater conversation needs to take place with intercropping down that side of the island and what crops we can target. This is how we started off the feed program. And again, I'm going to say, let us sit down with everybody and fix this problem and make sure that we are all going forward on the same page.
And as it relates to the use of the land and sparing a bit of land in the flatter areas, I think what comes to mind is that area just around the soil, actually, the area just around the soil, that some of that land could perhaps be used for housing solutions, and some of those trees could be grown more in the hilly areas, but also, and growing of trees in the hilly areas will also help stabilize some of the hills up there.
Honorable member, as I said, we can come back to the table and discuss these matters. I am not going to leave you stranded. You can rest assured. There is an orchard project that we have at Haggott's currently, and that project is well on the way. So we have to have a conversation as to how we can set about using flat land at Haggott's compared to moving into higher lands. I've heard this at St. Andrew Speaks. It is something that we have to see how we can make it a reality by talking it through. So it is not just something that we can really move ahead on just because it is placed there. We have to get everybody to understand what is happening at Haggott's. We've invested in a reservoir there, and we need now to get a full understanding between us and the constituents there so that we are all on the same page where that orchard is concerned.
Thank you very much, Minister. I know that you would do what you can. Appreciate it. Continue the good work.
Honorable Minister, you can wrap up.
Thank you, Chair. Given the time constraints, let me first of all start by thanking the entire team from the ministry for being here with me, but for the work that was done in 2023 and the work we've started this year. We have had our challenges. We are no different from any other ministry. It is always difficult in agriculture, particularly when we are dealing with climate change and managing the relationships between ourselves and farmers. But in spite of all of that, let me say to Barbadians that agriculture is poised to do well. We have projected at the CARICOM level that we are 94% reaching our 25 by 25 target, which is a good place to be in. When I looked at the stats that came out of the last heads of government meeting, Barbados was in an extremely good place when compared to the other islands. But I want to say to you equally that Barbadians must understand that this takes effort on everybody's part. This is not a single ministry effort. This is a Barbadian effort that we are asking here for. Those who feel that they can make a living from stealing crops, I want them to re-examine their thinking, because we are open to dialogue. We're open to giving people an opportunity. Oftentimes people want a shortcut, they want the easy way out, and oftentimes a shortcut is not always the best route. For us, embracing the youth, making sure that we get a schools program on board is the next step for us. And I want to say to all Barbadians that we will achieve our food security objectives if everybody will play their part. We went through a COVID period in 2021 and 2022. We're after achieving growth in 2019 of 22% and in 2020 of 11%. COVID unfared us. We had a decline of 35% in 2021, and whilst we were trying to rebuild in 2022, we still had a 16% decline. We have now reached a 21% increase in yields in 2023, which speaks to how we are starting to rebound. And this also marks the 4th increase in crop production in Barbados since 2018. Barbados reached its peak in production in 2020, when we produced 30.3 million kilograms of production under the Ministry of Agriculture, the highest we have achieved since 2008 measuring period. And therefore, I want to say to Barbadians, we are in a good place. I want to also give Barbadians the assurance that with our legislative framework, using the opportunity to repeal the Three Houses Spring Act, which was well over 300 years old, to put a management system in place at Three Houses Spring to allow for equity, allowing those who live along the stream and those farmers who are there to have access to water, putting a management system in place with regulations that speaks to how we manage over there is something that was outstanding for over 300 years, Chair. And then when we look at our livestock sector, the sanitary and phytosanitary legislation that we are putting in place and the food safety legislation speaks volumes to where we are. You heard the officers speak today, and they confirm that this is a matter that has been outstanding for well over 15 years. It is now being anchored here at this ministry in the year 2024, and I think that speaks volumes for the work that is being done at the ministry and the work that the officers are joining me in doing so that we can achieve these objectives. As it relates to the Black Belly Sheep program, I give Barbadians the assurance that all is well. We are ramping up what we are doing at Greenland to make sure that we can get the genetics right and keep them there. And then as far as our tissue culture lab, I am absolutely confident that that project will start this year, either this month or early April. And therefore, Barbadians can rest assured that if our timelines are met with the delivery of this project, then the ministry will see a revolution taking place in agriculture as it relates to tissue culture, clean planting materials for farmers, and an expansion and growth within the sector because of the work being done through that tissue culture lab. The food terminal of Barbados and Guyana, we have the investors on board. They are ready to start. They have resubmitted their new designs, and we are about to move on that food terminal. The prawns project has proven that it can work, and now we are asking Barbadians to come forward and participate. Barbados, for the first time in many years, produced rice in Barbados, and we are looking to expand that to 20 acres working with the Chinese so that we can have a rice project in Barbados at Pine Basin. We have an accelerated growth plan that is going to take us to our 25 by 25 targets. And we have identified the crops that we want to use there. And again, the ministry is forging ahead with making sure that we can achieve this by setting up a crop production unit, which will help us achieve this target. We are looking at how we can export to the UK, and the tissue culture lab will help us to be able to create the type of planting material for sweet potato, looking at various varieties in order for us to be able to export to the UK. But equally inducing young people to get into agriculture by the setup of the Innovation Center, which allows young people, schools coming to the tissue culture facility to see how technology works, getting a real-time experience, looking at farm bots and the use of robotics. The pork industry will have support through the ministry with the reintroduction of the GILT program, which would allow us to expand the production of pork in Barbados and reduce imports. And if necessary, we will have to take the necessary policy measures to make sure that we use more locally grown pork whilst we reduce the importation of pork. We are working with the dairy farmers. We met with them yesterday, and we have given them the assurance that we will give some support to them, and we are looking at how we can support them in getting the live cows into Barbados so that they can improve milk production and work with the Pine Hill Dairy. And then across Barbados, we are looking at the setup of 4 hydroponic systems that will give us a chance to see one at Mount Pyre, one at Curtains, one at Lears, and possibly one in Christchurch, maybe Fairy Valley. Those will give us 20,000 square foot of space and 106,000 holes for planting. This, Chair, represents what you call growth, represents setting strategic targets, and represents what a ministry should be doing if they're serious about food security. And of course, we have many players in Barbados who are involved in aquaponics. That is going to be expanded through our CARE program, and our water augmentation program is well on the way. And once we get the financing for this financial year, we will then work out the expansion, the water augmentation program. For the first time in Barbados, we are putting roads between farms. Mount Poya is benefiting as we speak, and we will continue this work to make sure that we have roads so that when it rains, farmers can still access their fields. Previously, they couldn't access the fields because they had to drive through dirt. Vehicles were sticking the dirt. People couldn't traverse the area. This is now being fixed. It's being fixed at Wakefield. It's being fixed at Mount Poya. And of course, our labs at Government Analytical Services and at Veterinary Services are being worked on. And through all of this, it gives us a perfect opportunity to be able to export, but equally create opportunities for all Barbadians and address the issues in agriculture that people have been asking us to address. And Chair, I wish at this point in time to say that I want to thank the entire chamber for the support that they've given, for the questions asked, and for giving us an opportunity to share with the public what the ministry has been doing in 2023 and what we are embarking on 2024. And with those few words, sir, I'm obliged to you.
Mr. Chairman, I beg that you do no report to His Honour the Speaker that we've made progress, and ask leave to sit again.
Chair, I beg to move that Head 83 stand part.
Having moved ahead, beg to move that you do no report to His Honour the Speaker that we've made progress, and ask leave to sit again.
The question is that I do not report progress to His Honor the Speaker. The question is that Head 83 stand part. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
And the other question is that you do not report to His Honour the Speaker that we've made progress. And
the question is that I do not report progress to His Honor the Speaker and beg for leave to sit again. All honorable members in favor, say aye. Honorable members against, say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The chairman has reported progress and requests leave to sit again. Honourable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, I beg to move that we do now suspend this sitting until Friday the 9th at 9.
The question is that this honourable chairman be suspended until Friday the 9th day of March, 2024 at 9 a.m. All those honourable members in favour, please say aye. Those against? 9 a.m. the 8th of March.
I won't be here, so you would have come Saturday.
Friday the 8th, Friday the 8th of March at 9 a.m. All the members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting, the ayes have it. This Honourable Chamber stands suspended until Friday, the 8th day of March at 9 a.m. in the forenoon.